Thank you, Sonia. I appreciate you. I'm going to stand up because I like to have a commanding presence over my audience. Anyway, thanks for putting this all together. It's pretty amazing to be a part of, some of these big wigs on the panel up here, some distinguished professors, distinguished researchers. So much above my pay grade. But I'm going to talk to you today about some tips and tricks to get published in top journals. But I won't spend too much time on my intro slide because Sonia really built me up pretty well. But what I want to show you kind of here, I try to say humble bragging, but it's really just bragging about myself. But it sets the stage to show you that I'm not just some person telling you to research, that I actually do it myself. So I have 112 as of, I guess, Thursday, journal articles out there that have been published, 17 book chapters, written 2 books, edited 2 books, and I have a 3rd one under review in Rutledge right now. So I write a lot. I really do it significantly with a lot of disciplines, not just I have a background in landscape architecture and in urban planning, which helps me be a little bit broader. But I work with virologists and public health, and I've published with chemists. It's really important that you branch out and see how you can work with these disciplines, because if you do, 44 grants that have about over $60 million in grant writing, bring external mainly. A lot of that is we do what we do, right? We do a lot of work with communities and engagement and those types of things, and projects that we build science into designs or plans or whatever we're doing. A lot of disciplines don't know that until you actually start working with them. So I've been lucky enough to be on big NIH grants and big NSF grants, but in those grants, most of them require engagement cores or information dissemination kind of projects. That is what we do anyways. So the stuff I do with communities, I'm already doing it. I might as well jump into some of these big, some of them 13 million, some of them 17 million. Obviously, it's a giant team. But the point is, you can kind of piggyback what you already do once you let these other disciplines know, because they don't want to do it, and we're good at it. So if you can kind of bridge out and get yourself known like that, it helps a lot. That's one of the reasons why I'm so decorated. I'll also say A&M is very strong research-oriented university, so I had a lot of great mentors there as well. So, but those things have also been built into, right? 5 of my students have won ASLA national awards. That's pretty hard to get one, but a lot of it is, they're all from a lot of these kind of research projects that I'm working on, that I build the projects into the studios or into the final projects. It should all be kind of a, wheel of success that you work together, and ring the chamois as much as you can is the best I could say. Because some of those projects that either won those awards or didn't win those awards, they can turn into book chapters if you're building in science right. So anyways, I'll get past my very long bragging slide and try to talk to you about publishing and how to get published. So I am part of a 5-person co-editorial board, I guess you'd call it, of the Journal of Planning, Education, and Research. Luckily or unluckily enough, our 5-year term ends in January. I'd be dishonest if I say I wasn't looking forward to that. But we got some new editors that are coming in, but it's been a great learning process. And as you know, we are in a society now, especially in academia. You hear the publisher perish a lot, but it's almost amplified to the point now that you have to be publishing, especially if you're tenure track. Or even associate professor now with the post-tenure review stuff. You got to keep going with this. So, there are things that you can be publishable and things that aren't publishable. And I know from experience, I have to do a lot of desk rejects as part of my job. People get their feelings hurt, and a lot of that time we'll desk reject stuff that's actually good papers. So a desk reject doesn't mean it's a bad paper. Sometimes it definitely does, but sometimes it just doesn't fit the scope of JPER. That's just the bottom line. So we had a lot of, for example, architects will submit something primarily about architecture, and it's written well, and it probably would have an impact in their field, but this is a planning journal, right? So you don't get your feelings hurt, I guess is my point. But you want to publish stuff that has a novelty to it. That's the key thing. There's almost a marketing side to publishing. I'll tell you, like the God's honest truth is, so I've been at A&M 12 years. It took me almost 3 years to publish my first article. And they were like, oh God, what are we going to do with this guy? Because my third year review was coming up, and he's like, but the good news is I had like 17 articles under review. The point is I kept getting stuff rejected. I was a very good designer, but I didn't know how to write at all. They definitely teach you how to do that there. But I learned the most from all the rejections I got, and I didn't give up. And the point is, learn from the reviews, and they can be harsh, and you're going to get your feelings hurt sometimes. I'm pretty grizzled now. I don't care what they say. I just react to it accordingly. But the good news is, like, if you keep trying, you keep getting better. You keep trying to flip them into different outlets, and do a lot of research, I would say, up front on the outlets that you go after. I'll kind of talk to you through my process. But by the time my third year review hit, I had 7 of them that had got published out of those so many that were under review. So I weathered the storm, thank God, but it was a little rough go my first couple years. But obviously I've figured it kind of clicks once you get rejected enough, almost like my dating life, I guess, to some degree. But still haven't quite figured that one out, but I don't know if you ever do. But there's different types of articles you can get published too, right? It doesn't all have to be full research articles. And different, and they're all peer reviewed for the most part, unless it says it on the journal that this one isn't. But you can do case studies, you can do book reviews, you can do quick research notes, you can do perspective essays, those types of things. Those are all counted as articles, right? And varying institutions have different levels of what they count them as, their promotion and tenure, but figure out what your paper is. If it's not a full research article, maybe it has a nugget of something that's important, but it can go in these other types of articles, right? But the point is, and I was a kind of a victim of this, it's much better the article be good, right, than it is rushed, because sometimes you get sick of writing it, you got to read it 100,000 times, and you say, I'm just going to submit it, get it off my plate. You're probably not going to have a lot of success when you do that, based on what I did. So that's the best I could say, is like, don't rush it. Get it right, because it's going to take you much longer in the long run if you rush it, because it's going to get rejected, or you're going to do multiple revisions. I'll say, like, I had an article that I got 6 different revisions from the same journal, and they rejected it after the 6th time. But so that was very heartbreaking to me. But and I was young assistant professor back then. But I also I flipped it into another journal. It's the only time that I've ever gotten accept as is into a journal. Right? So they don't know the story behind it, that it got rejected after 6 revisions. But so I don't know that I can technically claim that. But we go through it, and I think a lot of people get kind of embarrassed, to talk about those things. Like, oh, I've met people that say, I've never had an article rejected. I don't think you're researching if you haven't. I think, Neil deGrasse Tyson gets stuff rejected. That's just the nature of the beast. I don't think if you're not failing, you're probably not researching hard enough, honestly. I think probably about 30% of the stuff grants and those types of things, if you're getting 30% of what you're putting out there, awards, you're probably doing pretty well in this field, honestly. So go after things. But it's also figure out what the best outlet is for you. So the way I like to do it, at first I didn't really know all the journals. There's a lot more options out there now, actually. The way I like to do it is kind of aim high and then work my way down. I'll create a list, like a hierarchical list, for what I'm writing. Sometimes you already know what you're writing for, if it's a special issue or you want to go into a certain journal. I create kind of a 3-tiered list, okay, if I don't get into this one, I'll try this one and try to this one. They're all kind of, top to mid. I try to keep it, but figure out which one you want to go to and figure out a plan of how to attack this thing. If I don't get it here, I know it can go here, and if I don't get it here, I'm pretty sure I can get it in here, that kind of stuff. And use those things to. One of the things I did was I created a giant spreadsheet of all the different journals available, urban planning and landscape and stuff that I do. And I tried to kind of rank them in my head according to impact factors. And I have actually, if you get a list of attendees, I put together like a 96 journal thing that I could share with the audience if you. Okay. I'll try to speed this up, but basically this is kind of how every article should be set up. I actually, when I started, I used landscape architecture and urban planning, like their outline. I wrote every paper just like that. And I still use that to this day, and then I'll conform it to wherever I'm. But basically, I really write backwards in a sense. Honestly, I take what outputs I have, and try to figure out what's this telling me, what's this regression telling me, or whatever this is. What's this telling me? What are the results saying, and how is this novel, right? And then I write the intro and lit review around what's important, what the focus of that's going to be. And I'll get into some of these, right? These are kind of the typical outline of a paper. But the title is kind of the title and abstract are, if you're going to get reviewed, probably one of the more important first pieces, because if you get a title, let me say, if you get a title and it's got 2 colons in it, it's that long, you already lost the editor. You're clearly not focused. But the title and abstract are important because that's the first 2 things we're going to read as editors, of journal editors, or even reviewers. And you don't pass that litmus test, the rest of your article is biased in the fact that we're reading the rest of this going, this is going to be terrible. So really make those very important. So the title is like a summary of the abstract, which is a summary of the paper. That's basically it. Keep it concise and relate it to the focus of the paper. And the abstract is almost like the advertisement of the article. So you got to keep it concise. It should almost be like a sentence per section, right? Bam, bam, bam. It all links together. And don't repeat the abstract as the first paragraph in your introduction either, because you're going to get cut immediately. But be very specific on that. And then you got to do the key words. One of the things I've learned is, like, think about if you want someone to Google your article. This is kind of key for getting your citations up other than just the article, in that you don't want to even use the same words in the title because you're already going to get that captured by Googling. It's already in the title. So try to be broad and think about, if someone was to Google this, I want my article to show up. That should be what the keywords are about. And the introduction sets this thing up. It's really about what's like, very briefly, like, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Why is this important? And then what am I doing in this paper to solve that problem? And why is this going to be so important? Really market it in some of the key literature needs to be cited up front so they know what you're talking about. Don't have like a 9-page introduction. There's a lot of times we also see, like, some of the results are already in the introduction, and sometimes I don't know the answer to this. You're going to get like, should I put the intro and the lit review together or separate them? That can be tricky because some journals want it like that, some don't. You kind of got to do that on a journal by journal basis, and then really jump into the methods. And sometimes our methods can be a little fuzzy, right? Especially if you're doing I guess archival research, right? But there's different methods methodological approaches that you really need to spell out. If you don't have a sound method, a lot of times that's the reason why it gets rejected. So dig into what other people have done similar to what you're doing, base it on existing frameworks, and talk about how your framework's different because of X, Y, and Z. It's a very important part because incomplete kind of methods, that's really going to mean that your results are bogus if your methods aren't sound. So you got to really set that up hard. And so the results are, okay, here's what's happening. And a lot of times you'll see, like, people trying to hide stuff because they get in their head, like, this was my research question when I started this article, so I have to make my results say what I want this answer to be. You're doing it all wrong, which is why I say write backwards. Figure out what the results say so you're being honest, and then frame the question around what the results already say. So even if you find something different, right, go back and change your question, okay? Don't ask a question that has nothing to do with what the actual results say. And reviewers find everything. So if you try to say, oh, this was significant and this wasn't, but I'm not going to say anything about this other thing that totally counteracts what I'm trying to say here, they're going to say, hey, they're going to call you out on it. So go ahead and say, I found this, which surprised me, maybe because my data had this in it or so and so, you know, come up with a reason why you think that is. Because otherwise you're going to have to respond to it anyway. So that's the best I could tell you there, but the results are basically, here's what I found from the research question that I was looking at, and then here's what the results mean. So, you know, does it, what is the implications does it have for JPER, for planning policy? That's the key thing. A lot of times people just try to summarize the results, and that's really where the scope of the journal hits in the discussion. Are you linking it to what this journal actually wants you to kind of, what fields or what types of disciplines that you want to cater to in that journal? Is it about policy? Is it about something else? That's really the key part, if you're going to link to the journal's mission or not. Obviously, the subject and substance in there is too, but that's the key thing, right? So, I'm the king of early rejections, or I used to be. I've gotten way better at it now, but a lot of the reasons why you're going to get rejected is mainly due to novelty, or it's not novel. It's just like a basic. Someone's done this 100 times. I found the same thing they did. So what? Like, nobody wants to publish that. Or you basically, like, your generalizability is so small. Like I did a survey. I got 98 responses from a town with 2,000 people in it in Zimbabwe. Not that I'm talking bad about Zimbabwe, but the point is, what's that going to do for a broader audience? You can't really. That's a small niche. So how do you broaden that out, right? And really, about what's significant about this article is the key thing. So you have to play like you're writing a commercial for this thing almost, right? You have to market this thing like no one's done this, or the literature gaps are there are gaps in the lit that are doing this, and I'm going to fill those gaps by X, Y, and Z. And then I found this, and it disagreed with literature that said this, but it agreed with literature that said that kind of stuff, right? Other stuff, I mean, basic people submit stuff and they don't even conform to the style of the journal. That's getting cut immediately. And then you'll see this a lot, especially, I don't want to turn it off, but the literature coverage, I can promise you'll get called on that all the time, because people that are reviewing want you to cite their work, right? So you can almost tell who reviewed sometimes, right? To some varying degrees, right? But if someone says, you should cite Ewing, whatever, 15 times, you pretty much know you better throw some citations of that person in, because it's going back to them. It's unfortunate that happens, but it does. And then also obviously just, it's written in a way you can't understand it. So if you get the revision, not desk rejects, right? The important thing is you go through every comment. I mean, I've had responses to reviewers that were longer than the paper. So the way I do it, everyone has their own mechanism. I take every comment and make it a copy and paste it into the paper where I need to respond. Then I go through, respond, and type up a note for each one. I put it into a file at the end that says, here's what you said, here's the way I changed it, and why I changed it, blah, blah, blah. But you have to talk through each one of them, okay? That's the key thing, all right? So this is my last slide. I probably went over a little too much, I'm sorry. But my point is, I put this Michael Jordan thing up because it links back into what I said from the beginning. Basically, if you're not failing over and over, you're failing. That's the key thing, I think. So Jordan says he's missed 9,000 shots in his career, right? That's the reason why he was so good. I mean, I'm not trying to put myself on that level, but that's definitely the reasons why I research so strongly now, because I missed a lot of shots early on. But submit to the right journal, prepare this thing accordingly. I mean, you almost have to research. You have to research before you submit. Research the journal, make sure this is right? You have to put your own research in before you actually go to submit something. Be sure that you follow and adhere to what the focus of the journal is, and that there's a clear focus in the paper. Don't try to it can't be bogged down with, I got 3 research questions. You've lost the audience already, So be very focused, and everything in the paper has to wrap around that same focus, right? And I guess just the last thing is, don't give up. If you don't get it into something, react to what the reviewers say and revise it, flip it into something else. And the more you do that, the less you're going to get rejected, and the better your profile is going to be. So that's all I got today. So sorry I went over, but hopefully that helps you a little bit. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Good to see the home team. My name is Steven Ramos, and I'm sure there's going to be some overlap. Welcome to folks afar and near. Pleasure to have everyone here. I suppose, as Dr. Hirt kindly introduced me, I'm an associate editor for Planning Perspectives, which is the journal for the International Planning History Society. So I think you'll find many journals have institutional affiliates or sponsors or relationships. Dr. Hirt was editor, as she said, for the Journal of Urban History, which is related to SACRIF in that way as well, which is the US version of that. So perhaps the kind of geopolitics of publishing will be the leitmotif, I guess, throughout what it is I'm saying. I'm on scientific committees as well for architectural journals at the University of Catalunya in Barcelona, as well as the Universidad Católica in Peru. And the Planning Perspectives is based out of Cambridge. So I think it's interesting to think about sort of knowledge generation and its geo-positionality in that way, and cultural positionality. And perhaps this will be something we think about across journals, and just sort of thinking about, I know many in the audience are international students, so it's sort of, maybe that'll work for Q&A as well. Yes, so specifically about Planning Perspectives, it's International Peer-Reviewed Journal of History, Planning, and the Environment, published by Taylor and Francis. Maybe peer review is something else we can talk about as well. It's an imperfect process, but a necessary one. In general, if someone asks you to review something, do it. I mean, I know I'm an editor saying that, but if you're an editor and you see that someone accepts to do a review, should you get an article from that person later, you're going to start out more sympathetic to the situation. So feel flattered that you're getting invited to do it, and I know everyone's strapped for time, but do it. I think it's a good idea. Planning Perspectives, it's a forum for scholars interested in things we do. You can see the disciplines. It includes book reviews, comparative themes. There's no historical period that's excluded. So they must contribute original research subject to the double-blind process of peer review, which we'll talk about. And as I said, it's affiliated with the International Planning History Society. Members receive copies still. Although nowadays, with digital copies, this isn't quite the incentive it used to be. So maybe that'll be another thing we could discuss, is digital versus print in that way. There's a special section in the journal for, it's called the IPHS section, which normally journal articles have a maximum of between 8,000 to 10,000 words, but this is specifically 4,000 words to help with doctoral students, maybe young scholars, starting out with ideas, testing out some ideas. So it's a place in the journal to be a little bit more experimental, perhaps a little more brief to get feedback, but that's something to keep in mind, and it's something that I think is geared towards, like I said earlier, people getting their feet wet in publication. These are we have John Gold and his wife Margaret Gold, they're the editors-in-chief. I'm there in Tokyo at the moment there, I guess. And Carola Hein and Florian Urban are also reviewers. Florian Urban is the book reviewer. Katie Morages, you're in the book review team, aren't you? One, I like it. The home team. What's that?
Maybe
That's okay. John and Maggie have put together 6 rules of getting published. There was actually a 7th, but I deleted it. And I'll tell you why. Because they were sort of dismissing methodology. And in some fields of the panel, this is sacrilege. But the idea was a little bit what Professor Newman said. That the thinking is, well, history is, your methodology is you go to an archive and, you had fun. I don't think that's the case. I mean, I think in methodology, a lot of interesting things are happening in historiography and various methods within the scholarship. So to simply sort of, I think more than anything, they were referring to, should there be a large methodology section in something we receive, it's a bit of a red flag that may be for a more scientific-oriented journal than ours. But I don't think we should dismiss it outright. So that's just so that if they're watching this, they'll know why I deleted one. All right, do your homework. It may have planning in the title, but we are history journal, right? So more contemporary aspects of planning. There's plenty of journals out there for planning theory, for planning practice. That's great. Ours is historical. And we have historians in the room. To say to approach themes historically is to not say you can't approach contemporary themes, but it's an insistence on an historic approach in that way. So I guess this is true, though, for all journals. A very basic thing. Look it up and see if that's where your article should go. Don't just say, planning perspectives. Any planning article will do. I mean, I guess that probably is true for everyone. The length. This too, now actually on digital formats, people are accepting longer articles, right? Because in some ways the publication consideration isn't as pressing. But if you submit 17 or 18,000 words, it's gonna be hard. Just because not many people have that kind of patience to read all through that. And the journal article format really is a format that one can, is genre specific, but I think you start creeping into book format, and there's nothing wrong actually with the word limit parameter. It's actually gets you to say what you want to say, or you ought to say, I guess, in that way, for clarity. Aims. This was spoken about. Does it have clear aims? That they say. It sounds simple, but oftentimes folks don't even know what they're really trying to say. Try to think about what you want to say. Perhaps the work backwards, as Professor Newman pointed out. Provenance, just citations. Check them. Don't plagiarize. Be clear on what it is, where you're getting your information, and be honest about it. Also, formats. Different journals will have different citation formats, and if one encounters an article with a citation format that's not our journals, it's generally a red flag of what Professor Newman pointed out, that they're probably recycling an article from another rejected journal, which of course doesn't start you out on the best foot anyway. So check your citation formats, and you can see them on the web page. So again, this is kind of low-hanging fruit to deal with. Illustrations, particularly in our fields, of course, quality, 300 DPI is a good measure. Again, because of publication standards and costs, illustrations are sometimes something you have to negotiate, and you may have to go to your dean for some extra money to get some images published, but we believe in the image, so please. Dean Hirt, I'm sure, will give you that money, no problem. Don't be lazy. If you send a submission in the wrong format, etc., this is a little bit what I said earlier. Put your work in. You don't want to be dismissed out of hand, and there's a lot you can do around those things. And in short, read the notes for contributors and then follow up them to the letter, right? This is a little bit what we heard earlier. Study recent issues of the journal, both for style as well as themes, to make sure there's consonance. Remember that editors are happy to help, would like to help you make your preliminary inquiry, which is to say, if you're not sure about any of these things, if you reach out to an editor and ask those questions, generally it's their job to respond to you. And my hope is that people have had good experiences with those. There's always the bad apple, but what are you going to do? I guess this is true for peer review as well, what we said. There's always the bad apple. Someone, for whatever reason, is grinding an axe with a review process as opposed to, seeing a shrink. But just try to let that pass. It's imperfect, but it's necessary. I guess I'll bring it to a close. The IPHS conference is going to be in Hong Kong in 2024. So come one, come all. Conferences, especially if there's a journal related, are a good way to introduce your ideas. If you do a paper at a conference and you know that there's a journal affiliated, that's a nice way also to segue into a publication opportunity. I think I'll stop there. Thank you all.
So I did not bring any slides, but I want to talk about things at a macro level. If you know my background or don't know my background, before I came to the University of Georgia in 2006, I was a scientist at NASA for 12 years. So I didn't grow up in the traditional academic pathwork of getting my PhD, doing a postdoc, and becoming a faculty member. I got my PhD, worked in a federal agency, and then came to academia. So I actually approach things with a slightly different lens in terms of how I do everything in academia, candidly. And so I want to talk about sort of 3 things that I want you to remember if you're taking notes, because research shows that people remember things in threes. So I'm going to give you 3 sort of things to remember. My strategic approach to publishing, my tactical approach to publishing, and then my personal. And so I'm going to bend those into 3 boxes. So in terms of strategic, something that a committee member of mine at Florida State told me a long time ago is if you work on something, spend any appreciable amount of time writing something, there's probably a home for you to publish it. And so we know that there are things related to our research, our theses, our scholarly grant-funded work that are publishable, but you are often called upon to write a lot of different things by professional societies or perhaps projects that you've done. Usually I can find a home for it somewhere. For example, I wrote something recently. I was asked to be a part of, write something up on my thoughts on the lack of disciplinary diversity in the professional physical geography. And so, as I wrote that, I began to look at it and said, that's actually be a nice commentary article for one of our main outlets. And so submitted it and got it accepted. So if you work on it, there's probably a place you can publish. So that's one of those strategic high-level things. Secondly, journal diversity. And what I mean by that is we all are very familiar with our home journals and our disciplines. When I came to the geography here at UGA, I'm not a geographer by degree. I'm an atmospheric scientist or a meteorologist. And so, I was told when I came into geography, you better publish in some geography journals if you want tenure. I came here as an associate professor, but without tenure. I'd had quite a bit of success in publishing and getting grants, but I still didn't come in with tenure. So they were like, you better publish in geography journals. So I published in a geography journal or 2, although I had already like 80 publications when I came here. But understanding those types of little nuances of where to publish, but then also understanding that increasingly research is interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, or transdisciplinary. John Drake and I are sitting here on this panel together, and we recently published together in a journal. I'm sure John may talk about it in Ecological Research Letters on some compound disaster work that we were involved in. So I was chairing a committee for NASA, and the words fruit salad, fruit bowl, and smoothie came up. So those are all 3 different mixtures of fruit. And so we spent literally about 3 hours in a NASA conference room trying to define transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and cross-disciplinary, and interdisciplinary using fruit. So by the time I was done with that, I didn't want any fruit, but I know that there are various journals that maybe you aren't targeting that capture some of the research that you're doing. So don't be afraid to look more broadly beyond sort of your disciplinary journals. It's sort of my second sort of strategic tactic. Another strategic approach is who you publish and collaborate with matters. Particularly, and I noticed the title of this session is high-level journals. Oftentimes, particularly as a junior scholar or as a graduate student, by collaborating or partnering with a more experienced senior colleague, that might be a quick entryway into one of the top tier journals. In my world, that's like Nature or Science or Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And so at times you may feel like, I can't collaborate with that person. They're in the national academies or this and that. But that may be an opportunity to, collaborate with a very senior scholar, but also learn the ropes. And those people, I'll just let you in on a secret. There are some little politics and strategies of getting in some of those top journals. I mean, that needs to change, but some of these folks know those ropes quite well, so learn from them until the system breaks, because we need the system to break. It's actually flawed. All right, so now I'm going to go to my tactical things. Those are my strategic things. These are my tactical things. You got to seek funding, and why funding is important, particularly in the world that I operate in, is a lot of the journals I have to pay for them. There are page charges still, and people are charging for open source, and so it just makes things a lot easier when I have funding. And funding doesn't necessarily have to be from a large journal funding source like the National Science Foundation. Maybe there's internal funding from your department or from the university or so forth. Another sort of tactical strategy is a range of targets. In other words, you may have a journal paper that you are about to submit, and again, this kind of goes back to my other strategic point. Don't just sort of hone in on the journal that you always think about. Look at some of the people you cited in that paper and where were they published? They might give you some other sort of pathways to places that might be good journal homes for your paper because you cited that work, so it must be in some way related to that work. So that's sort of tactical. And then here are my personal thoughts on this. Find a writing time and strategy. This is underestimated, but I write at certain times of the day, every day. I don't have a haphazard approach to writing. In other words, there are certain things that I know that from my personal biorhythm standpoint, I do better. And so I write sort of peer-reviewed things, but I also write popular things too for Forbes and other folks like that. And so I tend to write better for myself earlier in the morning between about 5:30 and 8. Those are my writing times generally. Between about 1 and 3 is reading journal time. So I have a personal strategy for when I do certain things. Another personal strategy is don't take reviews personally. I mean, I see colleagues just get mad. They get frustrated. They get angry. I mean, I have one of that I collaborate with often, and she's like going back and forth right now with the NSF program manager because the grant got rejected. I was like, get over it. They didn't want it. Let's learn from it and go somewhere else. I mean, I've never internalized my professional work because as important as my work is to me, it's not that. My kids and playing golf and things like that are far more important to me. I'm serious. And when you have the right kind of personal perspective on your work, and Jeff knows this because he follows me on Facebook, I very much am very active in social media. By the way, at Dr. Shepard 2013 on Twitter or X, whatever it is. Don't take these things personally, just learn from them. That's important. So those are sort of some personal things. And then I want to close with just a couple of other points. So the way we are all trained as scholars is flawed in terms of communicating broadly to the public. I do both. And we learn as graduate students to sort of, you think about a triangle with the base at the top and the point at the bottom. That's how we learn as scholars. We give you all this information. We tell you how you did it. And then at the end of 300 pages dissertation or 2 hours later in a talk, we tell you what we found. And in the public sphere, we do that the other way. We actually tell you what we found right up front. I am a firm believer that even in terms of your peer-reviewed scholarship, you need to be able to articulate that beyond your scholar community. I mean, when I was at NASA, when we submitted a paper for publication to a peer-reviewed journal, we also had to write a popular summary. I had to be able to explain that in a way that was a popular summary in case USA Today came asking, well, what's the importance of this? I think that's good training for you, even because I've been the editor of the Journal of Applied Meteorology, Geography Compass, and various other things, and I still have seen papers where at the end of that paper, I still didn't know what they were trying to get at. And so just sort of use that lens to filter your own work, because we can get buried in academic ivory tower minutia, even in scholarly context. And I in many ways, I'm the anti-academic, and I proudly wear that hat. I do things deliberately very differently. I like going on TV. I like talking to policymakers. And so I use those lenses to filter even how I write my scholarly work as well. So those are just some thoughts that I had. And also understand, particularly for those of you that are women, communities of color, these academic journal indices are biased. They're biased because these C indices, what are these indices that are out there and these ratings and so forth? They're based on time that you've been in the field and the number of citations your articles have. But again, we know that some of our communities are underrepresented, so we don't have that track record or legacy of, and so those metrics are biased. And so please understand that, because those types of metrics are used in reviews and tenure performance things, and that's why I said earlier that's another part of the system that needs to be. We just need to drop something in there and just explode that all away. Yeah, there are a lot of things that we know about the publishing process that are flat out broken. I don't romanticize the process; it's a necessary process, but aspects of it are broken. So.
Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. Like Marshall, I come from a scientific point of view. I'm a scientist. I'm an ecologist. Like Marshall, I agree that the publishing system is broken. Your editors and editors-in-chief are aware of this, but as with other structural issues in society, we can't just fix it. So our advice to you is about how to navigate a system that we all understand already to be deeply flawed as a means of communication. I've worked for a number of different journals. I currently edit for two. Proceedings of the Royal Society Series B. The Royal Society of London was the first scientific society in the world. Our journal is almost 300 years old. I'm an associate editor for that journal. It's a general biological sciences journal, but it tends to the large scale: ecology, evolutionary biology, conservation biology, those kinds of disciplines. I am a senior editor for Ecology Letters. Ecology Letters is an upstart journal. It started about 25 years ago. Marcia was talking about tiers of journals. So in my field, it's like Nature and Science are generally viewed to be top journals, although some of us also have some suspicions about those journals. Then there's kind of a range of like general science journals that cross disciplines and subdisciplines. These are things like PLOS Biology. Proceedings of the Royal Society is one of those. And generally, if those are highly regarded, they're considered to be of higher intellectual value. They intend to publish findings whose importance and ramifications go beyond their specific discipline, which is why they're publishing multiple disciplines simultaneously. So the idea is kind of like, if you've got a finding that's important, that so many different people need to know about it, it must be an important one. And then there's what I think of as the disciplinary journals. And these are society journals, they're specialist journals, and they include a wide range of topical journals, especially published by the large publishing houses like Wiley, Springer, and Elsevier. Ecology Letters is one of these. It is one of the top-ranked field journals. It does not have the highest impact factor. If you look at impact factor for ecological journals, those journals that publish the most timely work often have the highest impact factor. Impact factor is one of these made-up statistics that's meant to tell us what's important and what's not. My opinion is you should use your own judgment about what's important and what's not. So to me, journals like Ecology, Ecological Monographs, the journals of the British Ecological Society, and Ecology Letters are actually, and American Naturalist are the top ecology journals, even though they don't have the highest impact factors. And I think Ecology Letters is the top of all of those, but you can have your own opinion. Maybe you want to know something about how journals are structured. Nowadays, most journals have large associate editorial boards. In the old days, you'd have 6 or 8 associate editors. Some journals now have hundreds. The two journals I work for have dozens, and they each work in a specialist area. There's a pyramid. There's an editor-in-chief, there's a team of senior editors, and then there's this large number of associate editors. In both journals I work for, the editor-in-chief basically functions like one of the senior editors, except they have the final decision and do the negotiating with the publishing house. But functionally, the senior editors all have final decision-making authority. Manuscripts come in, senior editors decide whether or not to send it to an associate editor, and they select from that, dozens of associate editors somebody whose subject area it is. When we send it to an associate editor, we're just asking for their opinion as to whether or not this is desk reject or whether it should be sent out for peer review. So sometimes desk reject is made by the senior editor, sometimes by the associate editor. The decision is always made by the senior editor, but often on the basis of a recommendation by the associate editor. It gets sent out for peer review. It goes out to 2 to 8 peer reviewers who write peer review reports. They send them back. The associate editor summarizes them, feeds that information to the senior editor along with a recommendation. We now have something like 8 recommendation categories that range from reject outright, reject but suggest they submit it to some other journal that we might have some publishing relationship with, revise and resubmit, accept contingently, all the way up to it's acceptable. It never is accepted on the first submission. So you should just know about this process. You should also know about the possibility of appeal. I think the fact that you can appeal a journal's decision is not relatively well known, and it often works. So if you think that your manuscript was unfairly rejected, I suggest writing an appeal to the editor-in-chief, or if you know who the person is, the senior editor who handled the manuscript. Dispassionately and briefly You need to state why the conclusion is wrong. Not just, oh, actually the work's more important than you evaluate, but wrong. And if you have a case, the senior editor will typically take a close look at it, will pass it to the associate editor and say, you need to better justify your decision to me. We don't want a bunch of disgruntled authors out there. So we stand by our associate editors. Like, it's hard to overturn the decision, but you should know we make those associate editors work hard to justify a rejection if there is a question, if there's a reasonable question. If the senior editor decides, nope, we're still not taking it, it doesn't mean you didn't have a good case. There's a lot that's involved in making a decision like this, including balance in the journal, wanting the associate editors to know that we stand by their intellectual judgments, right? We don't like to overturn their decisions, but it is something that works. Let's think about writing a little bit. In my view, scientific articles are communications of information. They're not trophies. We're not out there trying to get papers. We're trying to do scholarship, and when we find something or have an idea that's important, we want to share that with the communities of interest. So I urge my students, don't think about what journal you want to publish in. Think about what audience you want to communicate your ideas to, and then find out what journals they read. Presumably, they're in your community of scholarship. So I advise publishing in the journals that you read. There are lots and lots of journals out there. Many of them are very poorly read. I suggest only try to publish ideas that you believe are important, and then publish them in important places where they will be read. When submitting, nobody's talked about cover letters. Take the cover letter seriously. Explain to the editor-in-chief why it's appropriate for this journal, what's the important idea or finding. This should be a short, brief cover letter. Certainly no more than 2 paragraphs for the journals I work for, and 1 is great. Typically, we require at both of the journals I work for that you recommend associate editors, which means you have to have studied the editorial board before you submit your article. I suggest, so for a journal that has dozens of associate editors, I suggest at least 4 or 5 that could plausibly handle your manuscript. There are politics involved in this. I make decisions about which associate editors to send it to based partly on my cursory judgment. If the manuscript is really mathematical, I'm going to send it to my more mathematical associate editors because I want them to check the formulas. If it's based in a particular study system, well, I both want that study system expert, but I also don't want somebody who I know is a champion for coral reef ecology and is always going to recommend accept the coral reef papers, right? So I might send it to a grassland specialist if I have that concern about a particular associate editor. There are also publishing politics with larger publishing houses. Now, this has to go with the journals you choose to write in. I feel strongly about this. I do not appreciate the way that Springer and Elsevier have postured over the last 15 years or so. I've resigned from editing the journals that I used to work for that are published by Springer and Elsevier. My colleagues may edit for Springer and Elsevier and may think differently. Very rarely will I allow my students to submit a manuscript to a Springer or Elsevier publisher. There are many other academic publishers. Wiley and Oxford University Press publish a large number of very good, varied journals. Wiley and Oxford University Press are also under considerable business pressure to move toward a Springer and Elsevier model. This is something that I think as scholars we need to push back on. In my view, largely we write the papers, we edit the papers, we typeset the papers, and then they print it as a PDF. I think we're the ones doing the labor, and we should be telling the publishing world how it is that we want our work to be presented. What else? Writing. It's hard to learn. Once you learn it, I think most successful or at least prolific scholarly writers learn some formulas. In my field, I have some. I'm happy to share them with people. My graduate students have an essay they circulate that I wrote that I called the 15 Steps to Writing a Scientific Article. Introductions are the hardest part. There's a linguist, an applied linguist named John Swales from Michigan. Spent his career studying scientific articles as a linguistic artifact. He has a model, the CARS model. It stands for Create a Research Space. He also wrote a textbook on academic writing for graduate students. In my group, we've boiled the CARS model down to 3 steps, and I submit that the first draft of any introduction to an article coming out of my group should be 3 paragraphs, 1 paragraph for each step. I understand this is different from the scholarly traditions that many of you work in, but I believe that these short articles are the ones that are able to have the most benefit. Marshall mentions an article we published in December. It's been cited half a dozen times since then. It was 2,500 words. It was also a year and a half of work, which we boiled down to 2,500 words. But that paper's getting some traction. 5,000 words is the target, sort of the mode for manuscripts I ask my students to prepare. There are different article types. There's reviews, there's opinions. I want my graduate students to learn how to write the typical scientific article first, to do that well. And once you can turn that crank, then maybe experiment with some of these other article types. And to me, that typical article is 5,000 words. Some of these previous speakers talked about the content of your manuscript. I said that it has to have important ideas. I also think the typical article needs to have 2 important ideas. 1 important idea and it looks a little thin. 3 important ideas and you lose your audience. Therefore, 2 important ideas. So I suggest to my students, write your manuscript in 2 steps. Idea number 1 and then idea number 2. I've got a number of different schemas about how this can go. Field study and experiment. Mathematical model and experimental test. There's a variety of ways that it can go, but 2 ideas. Couple of trends in journal publishing you need to be aware of. Peer review is often abusive. Editors are aware of that. We push back. On the other hand, the strong statements of peer reviewers are often expressing a lot of insight into the discipline. We can't alienate our reviewers, and we do occasionally, accidentally, send them crappy papers, and then they get annoyed. Why are we wasting their time? One of the ways that journals are counteracting this is, well, all right, so one approach is open peer review. That's the opposite of double blind. Double blind's another approach. I favor open peer review, and I sign all of my reviews myself. I understand reasons why more junior scholars would prefer not to do that. Something that journals are doing is now publishing the entire record of communications between reviewers and authors. To be honest, I personally don't like that idea. Authors make mistakes that reviewers point out. I don't think we actually need to air all those mistakes once we've gotten the article to its final form. But this is something that some journals are doing, and it is upping the classiness, the level of professionalism, the civility of peer reviews. Data and methods supplements. The 2 journals I work for require that if you are submitting an empirical study, your data be made publicly and openly available, and that your methodology for coming to your conclusions be made openly available. That includes whatever computer code was used to analyze your data. A bunch of authors don't want to share their data because they don't want to be scooped on their next project. So what you should do is do your best project first. I strongly believe in open data, and the journals I work for won't publish your work, and we will not allow authors to publish subsequent articles if we find out they are not making their data openly available. They weren't making their data openly available, so now we require them to archive it on an open archive before we accept the article. Well, authors were archiving some of their data, not all of their data. So now we have, this is true at American Naturalist, Ecology Letters, Proceedings B, I'm sure many other journals. We're now hiring editors whose job is to take your data and code on the archive and inspect it. These are data editors before you can publish. This is hugely costly to publishing. it takes a tremendous amount of editorial time to do. What would be so much better is if the scholarly community just raised their game and played by the rules, right? We don't want to be referees and umpires. We want to be facilitators. But it's people trying to publish in journals that are inappropriate. It's peer reviewers trying to keep competitive work out. It's people protecting their data that is making the editorial process so cumbersome. I'll stop there.
You're gonna leave me something. All right, well, one of the benefits, there we go. One of the benefits of going last is I can speak the least, because they've covered pretty much everything, and I have a few notes. I'm an associate editor for a Springer journal that I happen to really like. It's Landscape Ecology, which many of you may end up or have already published in, because it does cross fairly well with landscape architecture. We don't do as much design, but we do. It's an international journal. The focus for a lot of the European authors is more the focus that you all, I think, the realms that you work in a little bit more. My training is a spatial ecologist, a wildlife ecologist, a forest ecologist, and so that's the area that I really work in. So the few things that I have that are sort of little pieces that I think either got maybe overlooked or maybe just said really quickly, and I just want to point out is whenever you're focusing on a journal that you're interested in, you really need to carefully read the aims and scope, because that's really going to tell you whether the area you're working in matches the journal. And it's really hard when, I think they all get desk rejected if you don't go there. The other thing I would suggest is, especially for those of you who are early in your career, is to aim high and go for the higher level journals. If you get a desk reject, you'll go quickly to the next. And that leads me to another thing is everybody use a reference manager, because then you just pop it in and your references are formatted, as Steve said. They're formatted for the correct journal, and you don't look like it's a reject from another journal. So that's something that I teach all of I teach my freshman Odyssey seminar that this week, right? They need to know early on. The other thing is, as an associate editor for Landscape Ecology, we're one of these journals that it's a focus area. We have about 25 associate editors, and we have a couple that are for book reviews and other special issues. But it's really hard to get reviewers right now. And I know a lot of you students are like, well, I can't review, I don't even have my degree yet. Ask your faculty advisor to do a group review of a journal article. Now, your advisor will have to actually clear that with the editor, but a lot of times they'll be like, sure, as long as you're supervising it. And that gives your students an opportunity to do a review. And I've done that several times, and I think it really helps my students to see, because then they know what the process looks like and how they're going to have to respond. So also the other thing is a lot of times you get a rejection, and you don't realize it's a reject, but it's with major revisions. It's not just a complete rejection. So be careful when you read that letter to see, is it a complete rejection or is it a reject with major revisions? And then, this was also mentioned several times, there are times when you have an article in and it's gone through several reviews and you're fairly sure it's going to get accepted, and then all of a sudden it gets rejected. I did that last spring, and it's because I looked at the series of responses that the reviewers or the author did to the reviewers, and they basically just kicked this methodological issue down, and they said, no, it's not an issue. And I looked at it and I said, it is an issue, you didn't deal with it, and it gets rejected. So be really careful when you're responding to your reviewers that you actually respond to what they're asking about. And if you have a legitimate reason that you're not going to make this suggested change, you need to be really clear about what that is and cite resources, cite other papers that have actually made that same usually it's methodological. The other thing, we do have an issue with Springer right now. They just switched Landscape Ecology to an open source, or open access, thank you. Open source is a different issue. So what that is, that's nice for people who are living in third world countries because they can get to the articles, but it's actually really costly for us as authors, because now we have to pay a lot more money for these And as John was saying, we are doing all the work. We're doing all the writing, all the research, all the editing, all the reviewing, and Springer's getting the money. And so it is, if we could change this, and it won't happen in my lifetime, but maybe it'll happen in one of yours lifetimes where this system will change. Either we'll pay reviewers, we'll pay editors, we won't pay the journals. I don't know how it's going to work, but I'm going to be fully retired by then. I know that. So the one thing is you should be aware of, there are tons of new journals out there, and a lot of them are predatory. And there are a few, I'm not going to name any names, but there are a few that I would be really, I don't publish, I published once in one of these and I was like, okay, this is not the way it should be done. And basically they are ones that want a review done in 5 days, and then they publish it in 10 days. Nobody does good science in 10 days. Nobody can review that in that short amount of time. So I'd be really careful when you're looking at a journal, if it's not one of these top tier journals that's in the field that everybody knows about, your advisors know about, I'd be really careful about what it is before you spend your effort and publish in there. And then the last thing is the cover letter came up. The only thing I didn't hear anybody say was, you also can suggest reviewers. You know your work really well. And when I look at papers and I'm trying to find a reviewer, it's really helpful if they've suggested some reviewers. You also can suggest reviewers that you don't want to review because you have some sort of conflict of interest. We all have issues in our past, and it's okay to suggest reviewers that you don't want to have review your manuscript. But it really helps me if I have 3 or 4 or 5 reviewers, because at least it gives me a start. Otherwise, I'm just trying to use keywords to find reviewers. And if I have somebody that they already know is familiar with the methodology, with the study system, it really helps. And I think that was the only bit. You guys did a great job of covering everything else.
I would just quickly add one thing to your comment about predatory journals. If they email you consistently, like those spam callers we get, it's probably predatory.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Sorry, I could make a comment on what he said about peer reviewing. So I wanted to just amplify what Jeff said about suggesting peer reviewers. It's a very good idea. There are studies that show that papers where peer reviewers are suggested are actually more likely to get accepted than papers where they are not. But you also should be sanguine about what the outcomes of that might be. So as an editor, we're the only ones that actually get to see all the peer reviews, all the comments, and all the replies, because the peer reviewers don't know who each other's identities are, for instance. Sometimes the person that you think might actually be the most favorable is the most critical. And sometimes the people that are known in your field for being hard-nosed can be the champion that actually makes your paper in, that says, yeah, there's some flaws in this paper, but I've been super critical and they've addressed most of it, so I think this should go in. It deserves the light of day. You don't, and this is also to amplify something that Jeff said, you don't have to do everything the reviewers ask of you. It's my view that reviewers are there to provide advice to editors. It bothers me when I hear reviewers say, I rejected that paper. No, you made a recommendation, and an editor accepted or rejected the paper. I specifically discount reviews that to me sound a lot like a long-winded way of saying this is not the paper I would have written.
Yeah, no, I've rescinded reviews that I was like, this review makes no sense to me, and you have to justify it to the reviewer. Like, I didn't think your review was good enough to send back out. So, but we had a different issue with JPER. We actually quit allowing them to suggest reviewers because they would put their colleagues and stuff on there, and it was to the point where we just, you know what, we'll find the reviewer. So it was a little bit different in that the people submitting were using it trying to use it to their advantage. So, but we typically, I would only, at least me, as when I'm editing one, I would only use it if I had to. Like from the 3 that we used to ask them to suggest 3. But I would go out and try to find my own, so I wouldn't run into any bias. But I would try to use theirs only if I had to, and if I did, I would only use one that they suggested. But yeah, we ended up just cutting the opportunity out altogether.
Yeah,
because
so
of that.
usually as an editor, I'll take a couple of the suggested peer reviews and then a couple of my own. And of course, you know that the opportunity to recommend reviewers or editors to exclude. I actually know an associate editor who often will pick one from that list because he wants to know, why is it that this person wants this excluded? So he does that knowingly and maybe is ready to discount that peer review, but he feels that there's a kind of due diligence that's involved in trying to figure out why maybe a peer reviewer is considered inappropriate. You can also explain why you think it's inappropriate. I don't think that transparency is helpful.
Just with peer reviewers, the other thing I would say is there's also research that people are doing less and less peer review, accepting to do reviews. So, and I'm sure everyone knows this, if you expect to publish and hope to publish, it's only, it seems to me, your responsibility as a member of a knowledge community to be willing to review as well as hope to publish. It just seems like a basic responsibility if you want to enter into this whole world. So it's not only is it in your interest, because you'll probably be in the favor of the journal, it's also, it seems to me, in your interest as a participant entering into knowledge production.
If you're getting, I don't know, 3 to 5 reviews for every manuscript you submit, then I think that means that you need to review 3 to 5 as many papers as you're submitting.
Please review, because I mean, I'm to the point where I have to ask 15 to 20 people just to get 3 reviews back. So
You're
it's,
lucky. I'm up and around 100.
So we, at Ecology Letters, we usually cut it off at about 15. If we've gone to 15 reviewers and haven't gotten enough reviewers, we say, this is itself a signal that this is not of sufficient interest to this community.
we've done that. Desk reject something because nobody wants to review it, which means it's not important, basically.
So somebody made the point, but I want to reiterate it. Think about journal diversity. When I was a junior faculty member, I published in urban geography once, and then it went well, so I published a second time. Then I went well, so I published a third time. At that point, the reviewer, and then I was going to send the 4th paper, and then the chief editor said, I don't think you should be sending me any more papers, because it begins looking suspicious that you somehow have a connection with this major journal, and you're not building similar relationships elsewhere. So, just because you know someone and went well, I mean, people are going to look at the diversity of venues that you're using, so don't just do one or just a couple. I know that's obvious, but the importance of good writing style cannot be underestimated. And I think it might be somewhat different in the sciences versus the humanities, but in the humanities, you really have to build a case rhetorically. So I gotta tell you that if you're writing in a way that's incomprehensible, it's too abstract, I don't understand as an editor what you're saying, it's gone. Because I don't have the time to rewrite your paper, and no one else will. Copy editing is not something that editors do. This is for the copy editors. So give us, if you've written in a way that it's not well written, maybe because English is not your first language, but that's my case too, it's your responsibility for this to be written well. No one else will do it. So that's the easiest thing to do, is to make sure that it's written well. And if necessary, hire a copy editor. If necessary, ask a colleague to read. But that's really step one. I think with this, as with everything else, audience is everything. And that came across. Like people were saying, there's probably a journal for everything. But it's really your job to do your research of where your research could go into. And one way of judging is exactly like people are saying, okay, so obviously this is a topic that's important to this knowledge community because I can see that I'm citing a bunch of pieces that are in this journal. At the same time, sometimes with your idea, this is kind of maybe an exception that actually illustrates the rule. Sometimes it may not be a really bad idea to get your article and send it to an entirely different knowledge community, precisely because they've never thought about it. So for example, like I published in a not newspaper, in a journal which is called Problems of Post-Communism. No one needs to know what this is. But like this journal is totally dominated by political economists and political scientists. So no one actually writes there about the built environment. And I thought that's a really good opportunity because they don't know anything about the built environment. My paper really shone. And so, of course, you have to cite their literatures, but it really makes a difference sometimes to say, here you're a community that has never thought about my issues, so let me bring something to you that to you is really novel. So sometimes it can work this way, but you have to be very strategic and, again, always know your audience. And in terms of knowing your audience, first of all, of course, you look at who's the chief editor. I would never miss an opportunity. I know that sounds really cheap shot, to cite the chief editor. Not because I think they're a selfish, self-centered person, but if you send something and you know that they're in your field, they would know what you are missing, so why miss it? And I always look who are the associate editors and who is on the editorial board, because these are the people that define my audience. And so if I know that they relate to what I do outside them too, because I think it's very likely my paper would go to them. So these are just like a really easy thing that you can do for yourself. So that's another little piece of wisdom. And then I guess everyone has their own way of how you write the paper. Like we already had some ideas, but this is how it works for me. So they're giving me 7,000 words. Some journals in the science communities, there will be 5,000. In planning perspective, because it's humanities, up to 10,000. If it's a law journal, you have up to 60,000. But I don't think any of us is publishing in a law journal. Yeah, it's like a whole book. It's a monograph. That's what a law journal is. It's a monograph. All right. So they've given me 7,000 words. I know that they probably can be pushed to 8,000. They're not going to be pushed to 10,000. So I have like a little, leeway out there. So here are my 8,000 words. So here's my basic structure. This is my table of content. In an 8,000 word paper, you probably cannot afford more than 1/10 to be in the introduction. So that's about 800 words. Say it's 1,000. If I'm writing the introduction, I'm on the 3,000 words, I've really lost my train of thought. I'm now on some other subject. Divide your words in, okay, I have about this amount of words for this topic, this amount for this topic, and if you're really exceeding this, you've lost your topic. You're now on some other topic. There is always more to say. It's harder to write short than long. So you gotta keep yourself disciplined. I find myself to spend more time cutting my papers than I actually spend writing my papers, and that's super inefficient. So maybe it's something to think about ahead of time. So these are just my words of wisdom that I think maybe complement.
I'd like to echo your point about novelty in a different space. I actually published a paper in 2010 in Environment and Planning in B, which I think is a journal in your world. I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah,
but
exactly right.
We had done some work looking at how if we grew the city of Houston in terms of its land cover, that it would cause climate change through changes in land surface forcing to the atmosphere, which is something I do know about. So it was an interesting experience. I probably wouldn't have navigated it very well, but it's another point to add to that. One of my co-authors was with the Houston-Galveston Planning Council, so he knew the planning lingo and world and sort of helped me navigate that space. So I knew the weather climate part, so I just wanted to echo that point.
Yeah, I probably cited that paper. I was with some of my work. But
I could underscore a couple of those points too. One is to say, in scientific writing, it is also rhetorical writing where you have to make your case. They're just different rules for the rhetoric, and you need to learn what they are. And I also want to push back against my colleagues who have recommended publishing in sort of outside of the what you consider to be your usual scholarly community. Not to say don't ever do it. I've done it. I have a friend and colleague who's a philosopher, and we published in a peer-reviewed philosophy journal. I'm a scientist. But for the graduate student or the assistant professor, it is very important to establish your place in a scholarly community first. And I think you can do that. I think you can do it by publishing in the same journal 4 times in a row if it is a respected society journal and that's where your audience is found. Nobody's going to publish their first 5 papers in Ecology Letters But if you can do that, more power to you.
Yeah, no, but he's right. I think that is an important caveat. Yeah, I mean, I'm a tenured full professor. I pretty much do what I want as far as publishing at this point, but I think there is a strategy. And that was the point I was kind of making too when I came into geography. I had to check my ego at the door because frankly, I felt like I should have gotten tenure coming in. But my point is, they told me I need to publish in some geography journals. I was in a geography department, so I did it. Some things you just have to just do it. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. That's an important point. I mean, you have to develop your own niche to get tenured. And I think you could do that by, publishing in, well-known journals for whatever field. But maybe your niche is that you've published with other disciplines in these other journals. I don't know. But, depends on what university you're at too, because if you're teaching in planning or landscape and they really want you to, like geography, right? You better do what
just do it, because that's what the PNT and the external reviewers, they're going to be operating from that lens. So you just.
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, most of the time, unless you got bad people mentoring you, you understand that your PNT committee and your department heads and the deans, we want you to get tenured, by the way. We're not out here we want you to do something where we can make a case for you. And we're good at making those cases. We're also good at making them if we don't want you to do it. But you usually do that to yourself. But anyways, I think those are valid points. However it takes you to develop that niche, you got to figure that out, right? Based on your field and your expertise and those types of things.
So maybe it's time to take a couple questions.
I mean, if you're assistant professor or PhD student, we're shoving peer-reviewed journal articles is what we push the first 6 years, right? And now other universities may do something different, but you need to get at least 10 to try to be tenured, right? And you could still not get it with 10, but we try to say you get one on your own and you get one with somebody else, right? You'll be on an article 2 a year, basically, is our goal. And most of our faculty go well beyond that. But we really push peer-reviewed journal articles for people, assistant professors, more than anything. And then once you get tenured, if you develop that track record, right, you should be starting to go after grants towards the end of that process anyway. But that sets up your scholarly accolades, like you've developed that niche that we talked about. So I'm going after this grant, now look at all of I've achieved in this field. You're going to have more grant success, right? Because you're a well-decorated person in XYZ field. But we don't even push books until you actually get tenured. But other universities do it different. Some say all we want you to do is write books. It just kind of depends on where you are, I think. But that's what we do at A&M in LA, in landscape architecture and urban planning, others.
Well, like if you're in history at A&M, they probably push books too. Yeah, so it depends on the discipline. But maybe I should just clarify this. I think when we say peer-reviewed here, we mean double-blind peer review. Because if you want to think about it, everything is peer-reviewed somehow. I mean, someone will going to read it before, unless you self-publish by yourself, someone is going to read it. So do you call that peer-reviewed? Well, you could, but that kind of defeats the purpose. What we're talking about is kind of the classic way to succeed in academia is to send to places where your name is anonymous, the editor knows it obviously, but your name is anonymous to the external reviewers and their names are anonymous. Now with book chapters, that's not as common, or even with books. With books or book chapters, often your name is disclosed to the reviewers. It says on the book cover when you submit it, but the reviewers know who you are, but you don't know who they are. That's usually how it works. So books don't, even the most prestigious presses, your name is known, so it's not the same double blind. But hey, if you have a contract with Cornell Press, that's good enough. But I think in journal publications, we are talking about double blind. And so in our field, I think generally the difference is between the things that are called a journal of something and something which is called a magazine. Right? So if it's a magazine, this is like we have the planning magazine. So it's, short, generally opinion pieces. It's a good thing to have, but it would not have gone through double blind. So so this is not normally counted.
It counts as something else, not as a journal article. We have a list of almost 100 journals.
We don't have that.
And we have an aspirational journal list and a
Yeah.
P&T journal
Yeah.
list and then
So-
a full list. And
Yeah.
guess what's not on our list? Landscape research records. So if you're publishing in that over and over, maybe up your game. Not that I'm hating on that journal at all.
What your dean says about planning journals is not true for science. So the majority of the scientific journals are single blind, which means your identity as an author is known to the reviewers, but their identities are not known to you. There are journals that are experimenting with double blind. It's not common.
Yeah, there are some double blind, but I would agree, John. Most of the STEM-related fields are single blind. But I think the key point here that I resonate with is know your environment, like you're saying. Know where you are. Know what's accepted. Know what counts and what doesn't. So it's just don't assume everything operates the same. I mean, for example, I'm in the Department of Geography. Geography has physical scientists like me. It has more humanities-focused people like Josh Barkin. It has sort of GIS techniques type folks like Jeff. And we all have different metrics. Like I've written a couple books, but books aren't metrics to the promotion tenure track that I go up through as a physical scientist. But some of my humanities, more social sciences colleagues, books are everything. One single author papers are everything, whereas in science, multi-author papers mean you collaborate. So know your culture.
I would only add that Dr. Shepard said something provocative, which I liked, what is it going to be, what's the catalyst that's going to change a broken system? And so, I think you're getting great perspectives on career-oriented publishing. But that said, I know within planning there's multiple venues, and so to understand the consequences of something non-traditional, you're a bit of a canary in a coal mine in a way. But at some point, a broken system's going to have to get course corrected, and it's possible that the venues that we're talking about may not be able to do that on their own. So I would only say, if it's something you feel good about and you know that there's a community that's speaking to, then think about it, but also know that it may give your career route a bit of a circuitous turn, that it has certain consequences as opposed to the kind of more linear paths, paved paths that we're talking about.
I don't know if the method that we use in natural sciences is relevant, but I'm happy to share this 15 steps thing with you. The reason we devised it is because this feeling of writer's block is quite common among graduate students. I think what's important is to break down the writing task into separate moments, each of which has a purpose, and to articulate for yourself what it is you're trying to accomplish in the next piece of writing. And I heard among the multiple speakers different ways of doing that. But I think that's important. With respect to your question about reviewing, whether it's like a background review or a literature search or a meta-analysis, it's becoming increasingly common that there are techniques that are used to systematically review literature. All of these require that you have at the front end a clear explanation to yourself of what kinds of information you're trying to extract from the literature that you're reviewing.
It was Thomas Mann who said, a writer is someone for whom writing is more painful. So it's vocational in that way. But also I would say my wife, I could talk her up, she's a methodologist and she's doing a lot of work on metasynthesis. And so that's a helpful way, I think, to kind of address syntheses systematically along with, meta-analyses that were mentioned.
So if I may offer some advice here. Okay, so you have some central theme or central research question, right? You only are reviewing the literature that helps you answer this question. So it isn't your job to, if you've read 50 papers relatively on topic, to summarize them all. Because they would be, like you said, I mean, most papers are not on one topic. They probably are on 2 and sometimes on 3. So it isn't the point of literature review to demonstrate to the reader that you've read them all and you know what they are about. Your point is to extract from the literature exactly what pertains to your research topic. So you might ignore 90% of the paper If there is something that is related, this is what you bring up. So I literally put my research question on my topic sometimes on my refrigerator, and everything has to relate to it. And I've told this advice to my students. They know my doctoral students. Okay, so in presentations by doctoral students, whether it's in writing or in verbally, I prohibit them to use the word interesting, because I find the entire world to be very interesting. I don't want you to tell me that you summarized this paper because you found it interesting. It was on topic or not. It somehow builds you, make a case, or you disagree with it. But something it's just interesting to know about, that's not something that should make it in your paper. Maybe there is a room for this in a book. But you know, papers are very carefully structured, so just be on topic at all times.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, like you're a PhD student, right, you said? So everything's interesting to you right now, right? You're reading all this lit for the first time. So everything you read is like, oh, I gotta put this in there, I gotta put that in there. But, which is a good thing, because you're hungry, you're thirsty for knowledge. And you know, now I'm old, so I'm very dumbfounded at most things. But Sonia's point's important. I think there might be 3 or 4 papers that you're like, oh my God, this is exactly what I'm doing, right? And then there might be 40 that I'm pulling one nugget from, whether it be methodologically or something about the background to set up what I'm doing, or the results say this or whatever. Or maybe they have a good lit review and you're stealing some format from them. I mean, to me, the way to do it is set up an outline that's like background, theory, case studies, methodology, and start putting in those pieces of those articles that fit in that outline, and just get it all in there. It might be an 80, 90 page document of everything the first time you organize it. And then you go in and try to connect those paragraphs within those certain sections. And as you do that, there'll be some that you'll move or relocate or throw out completely. But that's the best. I mean, literature reviews, to me as a PhD student, was the hardest and most boring part. But it's very important for writing the dissertation. And if you already have writer's block, it's tough, because you're going to be writing from that dissertation for like 10 years, right? I mean, you'll be pulling articles from it after you finish the dissertation, or if you do a paper type setup. I don't know which approach you're doing, but I mean, that at no point in your entire life will you have that much written that you can pull from for a few years, which is why we try to protect assistant professors when they come in. Like, take from this bundle of knowledge that you've created where you were and start publishing from it, right? So that's what I'd say on the lit review. As far as like the passion, I think you gotta be doing something you're interested and passionate about changing, you know? It needs to be some problem, frame it around some problem that you really want to solve, that's a societal issue or something important to your field, and really run with that as, hey, I'm helping the world in some way. That's the way I viewed it, right? Because I deal with built environment stuff. And you know, at the end of all things, you start off trying to save the entire planet. And the end of all things, you move the notch a little bit, right? But you start somewhere. I mean, you got to be passionate about what you're writing, especially dissertation-wise, because you're stuck on it for so long that, you know, so I hope you're starting off on fire and not like, you know, downtrodden or anything. But if not, maybe we get you some dissertation therapist or something. I don't know.
So I think the questioner asked an important question which has not been addressed, which is, how do you get started? So we've been talking about this little self-promotional essay that I have, how to write a scientific paper in 15 steps. So here's step number 1. What is the main point of your study? Write it as a short declarative sentence. I can't tell you how many students can't do that. It's a long sentence. It's not a sentence. It's not declarative. If you got something to say, you write it as a short declarative sentence. This is the working title. Doesn't mean it's the final title, it's the working title. This is the thesis of the paper. That doesn't change. Every paragraph must illuminate this thesis. Don't start writing until you know the main point. Until you know the main point, you have nothing to say. The other 14 steps are equally opinionated.